Selamat datang. I'm Elliot. Let's get to work. This is the third in a series of video presentations about Indonesian grammar. The affix system. This presentation covers the Indonesian affix system. The affix system elaborates bases by combining them with affixes. It does this in order to refine or extend the base's meaning, change the base's grammatical type, conform the base to a grammatical register. I imagine that the affix system developed to handle the large number of foreign loanwords that Indonesian absorbed in a piecemeal fashion during its evolution as a lingua franca. Here is a tortured example of the affix system in action. In English, a stealer steals a stolen object. That's stealing. In Indonesian, seorang pencuri mencuri curian. Itu pencurian. Here, the point is that the affix system takes base inputs and combines them with affixes to generate verb and noun outputs. Thus, the transitive verb base curi, to steal something, is transformed into the transitive verb mencuri, to steal something, and the nouns pencuri, thief, curian, stolen goods, and pencurian. The affix system first generates verbs from the bases that are fed into it. The verbs belong to the mung register, my name for Indonesian standard grammatical register. After that, the verbs can then be further modified to generate nouns and variants for use in other grammatical registers. For added excitement, the outputs are sometimes fed back into the affix system for another round of affixation. The orange cluster on the right of the flowchart represents nominalization using peng, ke, an. The purple cluster on the left represents the ng register, my name for a slangy grammatical register. It uses ng, in, ke. The cluster in the middle represents the affix system's triage, the core verb creation for the mung register, using the affixes mung, ber, kan, I, di, tur. As described in a later slide about the mung spelling rules, mung is shorthand for mung, me, mum, mun, nu. Here is an example of the affix system in action. The noun base, alam, nature, gets fed into it. One of the things that happens is alam combines with the circumfix mung I to make menyalami, to experience something. Menyalami can be transformed into penyalam-an to make the noun experience. Pengalaman that we just made can be spit out, fed back into the system to be prefixed with ber, to make ber pengalaman, experienced. Triage. At the core of the affix system's apparent complexity lies a simple triage that is based on the following three questions. Question 1, triage, stage 1. Does the verb have a direct object? If the verb has an object, then it's transitive and uses mung. Alternatively, if the verb does not have an object, then it is intransitive and uses ber. For example, the transitive verb menemui, to meet someone, can take the direct object seekor komodo to give menemui seekor komodo, to meet a Komodo dragon. The intransitive verb bertemu, to meet, cannot take a direct object, but it can combine with dengan to make the prepositional phrase dengan seekor komodo and produce bertemu dengan seekor komodo. Both phrases mean to meet a Komodo dragon. However, the dichotomy between transitive Hmong verbs and intransitive Bur verbs is far from absolute. For example, there are many intransitive verbs that are not affixed. So in example 1, datang, to come, duduk, to sit. And many Hmong verbs are intransitive. Example 2a is melompat, to jump, menari, to dance. Some, but not very many, Bur verbs are transitive. Example 2b, bernama, to be named something, and berumur, to be aged something. Moreover, Bur and Hmong often combine with intransitive verb bases simply to make well-formed transitive verbs for use in the Hmong register. Example 3a, chakap, to speak, becomes berchakap, to speak something. Example 3b, didi, to boil, becomes mandidi, to boil something. Finally, as described in the presentation about grammatical registers, the Hmong register uses a mix of prefixed and deprefixed forms because they play different grammatical roles. Example 4. Saya sedang mengejar Komodo yang tadi anjingku kejar. I'm chasing the Komodo dragon that my dog chased earlier. It uses the base kejar twice in the form with the affix Hmong in the main clause mengejar, and as the D prefix, D affix form kejar in the subordinate clause. If the learner is vexed that almost all Indonesian verbs seem to start with the letter M, now they know who is to blame, the affix system's prefix Hmong. Here are a few comparative examples for intransitive verbs. The base bicara, an intransitive verb base, to speak, is turned into berbicara, to speak. It's an example of a well-formed intransitive verb being made from an intransitive verb. Transitive verb base angkat, to lift something, can combine with ber, to give berangkat, to depart. That's a transitive verb base turning into an intransitive verb. The second question, triage stage 2. If the verb has a direct object, does it remain static? Does it move? If the direct object does not remain static, then the verb uses Hmong or Hmong kan. Alternatively, if the direct object remains static, then the verb uses Hmong i. The Hmong can forms that are used when the object is not static often coexist and have overlapping or complementary meanings. For example, only the Hmong form can be used without an explicit object. Example 1a, saya sedang membaca. In addition, transitive verb bases sometimes simply combine with Hmong to make a well-formed transitive verb for use in the Hmong register. Example 1b, dagang, to carry something, turns into the well-formed Hmong register mendagang. In these cases, the Hmong kan form often has an extended meaning or indicates the existence of an indirect object in addition to a direct object. So in example 1c, we have an extended meaning. Membesar, to grow, can give membesarkan, to raise something. In example 1d, we have a ditransitive verb, a verb with a direct and an indirect object. Saya membalikan putriku seekor Komodo. I bought my daughter a Komodo dragon. The dichotomy between Hmong i and Hmong kan is also not absolute. For example, repetitive I verbs have non-static objects. So in example 2, Komodo mencabik leher korbannya. The Komodo dragon tears the throat of the victim. But the Hmong I form, Komodo mencabiki leher korbannya means the Komodo dragon repeatedly tears at the throat of its victim. Here are a few comparative examples for transitive verbs. So with the transitive verb base antar, to deliver something, you can get mengantar, a well-formed transitive verb, or mengantarkan, a benefactive can, to bring something to someone. The intransitive verb base temu, as in bertemu, to meet, can combine with meni to give menemui, to meet somebody. So that's meng-i, a static object. The object, the person you're meeting, you're not moving. Adjective, halus, smooth, that's the base, can turn into menghaluskan, to make something smooth. That's an example of an adjective base simply turning into a causative kan, transitive verb. All right, the last third question, triage stage 3. Is the action intentional? If the action is intentionally performed by the passive agent, then the passive form of the verb uses the. Alternatively, if the action is not intentionally performed by the passive agent, then the passive form of the verb uses tor. By contrast to the first two questions in the triage, this third question does not apply to the active voice, but instead to the passive voice. For example, di sandung Komodo means tripped by a Komodo. The Komodo did it on purpose. Whereas tor sandung Komodo means tripped over a Komodo. The three dichotomies that make up the triage are fundamental to Indonesian grammar. Object versus no object, static object versus non-static object, intentional action versus non-intentional action. The object versus no object dichotomy is also shared by English grammar. However, the other two dichotomies are peculiar to Indonesian. I imagine that Indonesian cares about them because it cares a lot about the details of narrative action and intention. Indonesian is a down-to-earth language. This emphasis is also reflected in other aspects of Indonesian grammar, such as mock passive and bound pronouns. One of the complexities of the affix system is pronunciation and spelling changes at the junction between the affix and the base. How these changes are made is described in later slides about spelling rules. The affix system is also rife with many other nuances and exceptions. For example, this presentation glosses over the fact that the grammatical type of a base often determine which affixes it can combine with and the meanings of the affix derivatives. The reason for glossing over this is because the meaning of an affix derivative is often evident from the meaning of the base. Finally, as noted previously, the triage makes verbs for the mung register. Other parts of the affix system then adapt the verbs for use in other grammatical registers, as described in the presentation about grammatical registers. All right, let's keep beating this dead horse, go through this again. The affix system starts by taking a base input and it feeds it into the triage. It then asks the question, object or no object? If there's no object, you get an intransitive verb. If there's an object, you stick on mung to give a transitive mung verb. But wait, there's another question. Is the object static or non-static? Static is where the actor, the subject, doesn't move it. Static is where he moves it, throws a ball. If the object's not moved, if it's static, you get a transitive mung-i verb. If it's non-static, you get a transitive mung verb or a mung-kan verb. The final question is intentional action or non-intentional action in the passive voice. So if in a passive sentence you have intentional action by the agent on the subject, you have a passive die verb. If the action of the agent on the subject is non-intentional, accidental, you have a passive total verb. All right, here's another part of the affix system. It nominalizes bases with peng, ke, an. But it also nominalizes affixed verbs created by the triage using peng, ke, an. So verbs and meng verbs and die verbs and total verbs are nominalized with peng, an. The third part of the affix system converts the transitive verbs in the meng register to the slangy eng register. Practice tip. The learner should pay special attention to the affix system because it is a big deal. However, rote memorization of its many nuances and exceptions is not productive. Instead, the learner should focus on coming to terms with how it works, and then apply this knowledge in an ad hoc manner to address specific problems. Moreover, the unrelenting complexity of the affix system often makes it difficult to predict exactly what will happen when a base is fed into it. As a result, learning the affix system, like many other topics in Indonesian grammar, is more about learning vocabulary than tinkering with hypotheticals.
Bating keleler, genjer nong kedoan, bating keleler.